So you all escaped from the fire and the humans, except for the newts. That's about the top and bottom of it, old son. And did we regret leaving them newts behind?
Did ya?
Yes, Weasel, we did, and it taught us a lesson. We animals of Farthing Wood had to stick together, all for one and one for all. And if we did not, we would surely perish like the newts, never reach White Deer Park at all.
And Mole learnt not to be so greedy, did he, Badger?
Bold dreamer, not quite so greedy anyway.
But what happened next?
Huh? Well, now, where were we? Yes, we animals were standing on the island in the middle of the lake, looking at the humans on the other side, looking at us, when suddenly... Owl! Where is she?
Gone hunting with Vixen. She gets bored if she isn't doing the talking.
Well, anyway, suddenly there was a loud clap of thunder. Yes. We looked up and saw the storm clouds gathering. It was high time we left the devastated army land and looked for shelter. The fire was out, and the men were packing up their machines and leaving too. We turned for guidance to Toad. Once over the causeway, it's straight on for the fence, mateys. Then we're off army land and onto farmland. As we set off, lightning rent the sky, and then the rain started. It's raining, it's pouring, the old man is snoring. He went to bed and he bumped his head and he couldn't get up in the morning. Ha 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 ha! Yes, but we weren't all so happy to see the rain. The heavy drops bombarded the dry, resisting earth, turning paths and furrows into rivers, which the smaller animals could scarcely navigate. They walked in single file, holding on to one another, gingerly skirting cracks in the baked earth, down which water now rushed, getting farther and farther behind the rest of us. And then, at last, the stony earth turned to mud, and once again the smaller creatures struggled. They were in danger of being left behind for good. Ada, whether from maliciousness or kindness...
Kindness? Ada?
decided to speed them up. She slithered behind them and began to hiss, flickering her tongue in a most threatening manner. Terrified, the smaller creatures tried to run forward through the mud, and as they ran, they fell against the ones in front. One after another, the animals fell. Vole on shrew, shrew on mouse, mouse on hedgehog, hedgehog on squirrel, squirrel on rabbit, and rabbit on hare. Exhausted from the terrors of the night, tempers flared. Squirrel blamed Hedgehog. You did that on purpose. Hedgehog became more prickly than ever. She accused Mouse, then of course Weasel joined in, stirring up trouble as usual, until everyone was blaming everybody else. And, to cut a long story short, the whole thing ended in a mud fight. Everyone shouting and throwing lumps of earth at one another, till at the head of the line, Fox heard the commotion and turned back to see what was going on. And someone, aiming for someone else, threw a paw full of mud right in his face. Who was to blame? Weasel blamed Ada. Ada blamed Weasel. Everybody blamed everybody else. Sadly, Fox listened and sighed. The team spirit had evaporated already, and all because of a bit of rain. But it was no good getting angry. Wiping the mud from his eyes, Fox quietened them down and said,
Come on now. I'm sure we'll find shelter soon. I'll take some of you on my back, shall I?
And so we continued onwards through the deluge. And to think we had been crying out for water such a short time ago. But shelter was not so easy to find. Eventually, after what seemed hours, we came to a hedge, and there we found all the birds, owl, kestrel, and the 2 pheasants, sitting in its shelter. Gratefully the animals crowded in after them, but still they squabbled. Only Toad was happy, dancing between the raindrops beyond the hedge. He danced off into the rain, singing, It's raining, it's pouring. And then he danced back and stood looking under the hedge at the miserable line of animals sheltering there. And he said, How does a barn sound to you, mateys, eh? Ha-ha! It sounded dry and warm and everything we were dreaming of. And immediately there was a clamour of voices demanding to go. Fox wasn't very happy about it. Too near humans, you know. But as the rain began to drip through the branches onto his nose, he finally gave in, and off we went again in the rain and mud in search of Toadie's barn. When we got there, we found the doors were open. Fox hesitated, but the rest of us rushed in, making our beds in the straw, groaning with pleasure at our new-found warmth and comfort. I reassured Fox. "Humans never come out in the rain if they can help it," I said. And Fox reluctantly agreed. But, he said, if we were to stay in a human's barn, then someone would have to keep watch. The first sign of a man, and they must give the alarm. It was a wise precaution. We had chosen our leader well. So, Kestrel took first watch, taking her perch in a plum tree overlooking the farmyard, and we all slept. Some time later, when the rain had stopped and shafts of sunlight came through the windows of the barn to shine on the straw, Kestrel returned. Pheasant was to be the second watch. She went up to the sleeping pheasants and coughed loudly. The female woke and shook her husband gently, but he claimed he needed his beauty sleep and closed his eyes again. So the female went out alone, our only sentry. And slowly, as she sat on the branch of the plum tree, the pheasant's eyes began to droop. But she was an honest hen, and knew she should stay awake, so she forced herself to open her eyes again. But it was to no avail. Once more the eyelids closed, and this time she really was asleep. The rain had stopped, and the farmer had come out in search of eggs. He passed with his dog right under the tree where our pheasant slept, and cried with dismay when he saw his hen coop. There were feathers everywhere. Eggs were smashed, and 2 hens lay dead. Obviously he thought a fox had been in the night. Of course the farmer blamed his dog. He was supposed to be a guard dog, wasn't he? He kicked him. And Mrs. Pheasant woke. Immediately she left the tree and started towards the barn, intent on waking the others, and then she was dead. Her husband woke with a scream. He knew what had happened immediately. The rabbits panicked, and through the window Pheasant saw his wife limp in the farmer's hand. He was stricken with grief. We did our best to keep him quiet, but the din had drawn the man towards the barn. We lay as still and silently as we could, as his shadow crossed the window. Then he walked down the side of the barn, and suddenly the door slammed shut. We were trapped inside, and on the other side of the door, the great big farmer's dog was standing guard. Through the window we saw the farmer, pheasant in one hand, gun in the other, going towards the house. Soon he would be back, but what could we do? The windows were fast shut. There was no other way out. We turned to Owl for help. I say, where is Owl? She might tell her bit of the story. Ah, well, we turned to Owl. She puffed up her feathers in her usual way and announced that this problem was going to take some thinking about. Well, of course, things were desperate. The farmer would be back at any minute. There wasn't time for thinking. But Owl just calmly closed her eyes and went into deep, deep thought.
We thought she'd gone to sleep.
After a while, the animal became restive, but still Owl sat, her eyes closed, refusing to budge.
She looked really silly.
What? Who? Who looked silly, pray?
You did, you silly old bird.
I'd be careful if I were you, Weasel. One can stretch the oath too far.
We had just come to the bit in the barn, Owl, when we were so desperate to find a way out, and you so graciously lent your wisdom to our predicament.
Creep.
Ah, yes. Yes, well, I went into a deep thought.
We know. Manners.
And then it came to me. We could dig our way out. Mole was chosen as best digger. But unfortunately, the floor of the barn was made of wood, and he could do nothing. So the rabbits, the squirrels, and all the other rodents set to chewing the floorboards, and soon they had made a hole big enough for Mole to get into. And of course, once inside, he started burrowing. The rest of the animals cheered him on, but they were making a lot of noise, and the dog, who was sitting just outside the door keeping guard, must have heard, because he started growling. Immediately, Ada slipped under the door and out into the yard. She said,
I want to do, Ada. She said, my bite is worse than my bark. So, you better keep doggo, Bruno.
well, something like that. Anyway, the dog didn't dare move or make so much as a squeak, so the tunnelling recommenced. And now Badger joined in, following behind Mole, widening the tunnel for the larger animals. And soon piles of mud started building up, and the remaining animals took it on themselves to fetch it out of the hole, leaving great heaps of soil on the barn floor. And then, finally, Mole broke through into the orchard and called back, "We're there!"
Good old Moly.
And not before time. Even as we clambered into the hole after Mole and Badger, we heard the footsteps of the man approaching. The rodents went first, then the rabbits and hares, then Pheasant, sobbing about his wife. Kestrel, then Toad, then I, and last of all, just as we heard the barn doors open, Fox leapt into the hole and we raced to freedom.
Hooray! The dog had stuck its head down the hole, but it was too big to come on after us. Its bark deafened me, echoing off the sides of the tunnel. And then I knew the farmer had struck again. I couldn't help feel sorry for that stupid dog. Whatever it did, it was wrong. But there was no time to come out in sympathy. As soon as my nose smelt fresh air, we was off, through the orchard and away up the hill. Al scouted on ahead. She said there was a copse on the other side of the hill. We could make for that. But the dog was on our heels. Kestrel kept on at us. Not that she needed to tell us. We knew we had to keep going. I could hear that dog getting nearer and nearer. Al gave me a warning.
When running away, watch out for your back.
Yes, it was her usual mystifying sort of comment.
Beg your pardon?
But I knew what she was getting at. The smaller animals who brought up the rear were in the most danger, because the dog was going to reach them first. Well, it stood to reason. My heart sank. It was me that blooming dog was after, I knew that. So it was going to have to be me he dealt with. So, leaving Badger in charge, I went back down the line and strolled towards this great stupid farm dog. Well, he was a bit nonplussed to see his quarry coming towards him, casual as you like. Put him off his stroke for a start. And he just stood there, looking at me. So I thought I'd better give him a nudge, and I said, I suppose it was me you wanted, eh? Well, the dog looks at me, and he finally remembers what he's supposed to be doing, and he says,
Can I do the dog, Fox? I've heard this story so often, I know exactly what to say.
Oh, go on then, Toady.
My master wants you dead. Woof, woof.
You're a rotten dog.
I want to go.
Here, whose story is this? Well, the dog said to me, my master wants you dead, Foxy. And I said, so what? He wants every fox dead, doesn't he? And the dog said, yes, but you're special. You killed his chickens. Well, I hadn't, so I told him. I didn't kill your master's chickens, I said. Then he accused me of being a liar. And I said, look, Bruno, if that's what you're called, I'm not the only fox around here, you know. The fox you're after could be any one of a number. But this was far too reasonable for Bruno. He didn't want to know. As far as he was concerned, a fox had killed the chickens, and I was a fox, and that was that. Well, I said to him, it wasn't fair. Blaming me was the same as his master blaming him because his wife burnt the dinner. Well, that argument went right home, I could see that. And while Bruno was thinking about it, I told him about the rest of the animals, and the journey and the oath, and how we'd sworn to look after one another. And, well, he didn't believe me at first. Then I said, why else would I have been sheltering in a barn with a bunch of rabbits? Then he looked at me, this dazed look in his eyes, and he said, you're just winding me up, aren't you? Go on, say you are. Tell me you're just winding me up. No animals would take oaths to look after each other. Well, I told him it was the truth, but he still didn't believe me. He decided I was just trying to put him off his stroke. So he started growling and baring his teeth at me. "You can't fool me," he said. "You're just trying to put me off killing you, but you can't. My master wants you dead, and he'll be very pleased with me when I've killed you. So that's what I'm gonna do." I told him his master wouldn't be pleased at all. He would be angry, because the dog would have had all the satisfaction of killing me, when he'd rather have done it himself. "All right," said Bruno. "I'll take you back alive." "Just you try," I warned him. Well, it was stalemate. The dog was losing heart. Confusion had set in, you see. He started muttering to himself. "Oh, I don't know. First my master wants me to kill his fox, then he doesn't, and whatever I do, he still blames me." He was proper tied in knots. Well, I took that for my cue and started walking away, very slowly at first. I could hear the dog still muttering away to himself. Got me proper confused, he has. Oaths. Be telling me the cat's made a friend of the mouse next, and then I suppose he'll tell me I've made a friend of the cat. Oh, I don't know. Whatever I do, it's wrong, so why bother? Might as well go home, really. Then he turned tail and he went back to the farm.
Bravo!
Hey! Hooray!
Fox really foxed him, eh?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't difficult. That poor blooming dog had been so mollycoddled by humans and so kicked about by them, it had lost what few wits it ever had.
Now, come along, Fox. You were positively heroic. Don't deny it.
Well, I did what I had to, that's all. And afterwards, all I wanted was to reach that copse and have a well-earned rest. It was a nice little wood. The trees were tall and full of rooks cawing away. Very peaceful. Well, it was peaceful apart from the row Weasel was having with Hedgehog and the problem the hares were having with Pheasant. He kept on crying about his wife, and he seemed to expect Hare's wife to wait on him hand and foot, like his own silly hen had done. Got up Hare's nose, that did. But it was just normal life, really. I closed my eyes. I brushed the fly away. Then I heard Badger say,
I do wish Ada would flick out her tongue and swallow that dratted fly.
And then I remembered. We had left Ada behind. She was probably still keeping guard outside the barn.
I said, never mind. Then Badger got all sentimental. You know how he does, silly old fool. And he said we couldn't leave Ada behind, not after all she'd done, keeping that dog at bay while we dug the hole and all that. And I said, what do you mean, what she'd done? All that stupid hissing and stuff? And Fox said,
all that hissing and stuff probably saved our lives. I insisted someone go back for her. I asked for volunteers.
Weren't many, were there? Very popular, wasn't she?
Yeah, and then Pheasant spoke up. He said he'd go back. It would give him one more chance to see his wife's final resting place.
He was just playing for sympathy.
And off he went, flying up into the air, and then down again, and then up again, and then down again, and pheasants really are terrible at flying. And then finally, he was gone. A little while later, we heard a gunshot, and we knew he too was dead. Pheasants are no good without their partners, so it was better they went together, really. But I still blamed myself. I wanted to go and fetch Ada.
But if Pheasant was playing for sympathy, Fox was really putting on the heroism. It's true, he would have been shot. It was a stupid suggestion. So I went in his place, leaving the rest of you
To have a party. And we did too, because the rooks came down and we all had a lovely sing-song.
Oh, no, please. Yes, mateys. The rook sang, then I sang, Toad Goes a-Courting. Shall I sing it for you now, eh?
No!
Then I sang. Half a pound of twopenny rice, half a pound of treacle. That's the way the money goes. What goes the weasel? Up and down the squirrel trees, in and out of the warren. That's the way to steal a meal. What goes the weasel? Did I hear someone calling for an encore? Here. Where've they all gone? Hello? Where are you? Hello? Oh, come back, will you?
Promise us you won't sing anymore.
Oh, I don't know. Some people have just got no taste.
Promise!
Please, matey, I can't bear no more.
Oh, all right. If you insist. But I'll salt, mind.
A small price to pay.
Dad, why have I gone deaf? It'll pass, son. I know from experience. It'll pass. Now, where were we? Oh, yeah. After Weasel had finished singing. Oh, yes. Owl had gone back to the farm in search of Ada.
I found Ada under a stone in the farmyard. Realizing her desertion, she had wisely gone to sleep, waiting where she was for rescue. She was very calm, very philosophical. She told me pheasant was presently roosting for the farmer's supper, and herself offered to share a rat with me. Actually, it was a particularly tasty rat, very juicy.
Oh, get on with it.
Everything comes to him or her who waits. It was a balmy evening.
Yes, I'm sure it was.
And Ada and I felt we deserved a treat. So, temporarily freed from the bounds of the oath, we decided to go hunting. It turned out to be an excellent opportunity for a conference. As you may or may not be aware, I had been unhappy about the quality of Fox's leadership for some time.
Don't worry, son. I'm used to it. Sticks and stones.
In my opinion, at that time, Fox, you couldn't lead a pack of hounds.
Oh, no, that is a nasty thing to say.
No, well, I apologize for my turn of phrase. However,
Oh, get on with it.
I will, if you will allow me. And speaking of hounds, suppose Fox had, shall we say...
Got himself killed.
Not to put too fine a point on it, yes. Who then would lead us? Certainly not Badger. He was far too old. There remained...
Guess who?
myself. For the moment, the other animals seemed satisfied, but time would tell whether Fox was equal to the task. And if it proved that he was not, then I knew my duty. After sating our appetites with the permitted rodents, Ada and I returned to the copse. And in the nick of time. In my absence, more trouble had ensued, and Fox simply did not know what to do about it.
She's right. I didn't. One of the baby rabbits had got itself caught by the neck in a snare. The mother rabbit was panicking as usual. The squirrels had broken their teeth trying to gnaw through the metal, and the more that poor little mite struggled, the tighter the noose got. I told it to keep still, while Owl had one of her thoughts. She closed her eyes and off she went. It took her ages. I thought the rabbit was for the chop. Then suddenly she opened her eyes and said,
"You're attacking the wrong part of the snare."
She told Molly to start digging under the post. Well, he couldn't wait. He got started, and after a bit, the post came away from the ground, and then we unhooked the metal wire, and the baby rabbit was free. Just like that. But the poor thing, it could hardly speak. Its throat was so sore. Cruel things, them traps. Owl started telling me off for not checking the area for traps in the first place.
A moment's thought can save a lifetime's misery.
And she was right. I should have checked. You're a wise old bird, Owl, I'll give you that. And I'll admit it now. I couldn't have saved that rabbit.
Well, it's very nice to be appreciated, I must say.
Oh, shut up.
Well, it was clear as day we couldn't stay in the copse. It just wasn't safe. So we said our goodbyes to our friends the rooks, and off we went again. The hares were feeling very sad. They were feeling guilty because they'd been irritable with pheasant. People always feel guilty after somebody's gone, when it's too late. Anyway, like I said, off we went, towed up ahead, guiding our way towards White Deer Park. And then we came to the river.
Oh, I hadn't thought, mateys. I crossed it and no trouble. No, he hadn't thought. No offence, Toady, old chap. Why should you? You see, to Toad, a river isn't any sort of an obstacle. But to a rabbit or a mouse or to a hedgehog, it can seem very big and very dangerous. And this river was big. It was wide and it was deep, and there was a strong current into the bargain. Anyway, Toad decided to give us a lead. He dipped his toes in and called out, "Come on in, mateys! Ha-ha! The water's wonderful!" And he started swimming across. The rest of the animals lined up on the riverbank watching. Fox said,
Are you ready, everybody? Good. We'll all jump in together. 1, 2, 3.
and in they jumped. Toad did a wonderful job of encouraging the rodents. They, little creatures, struggled on heroically. But the rabbits, oh dear, those rabbits. Guess what they did? Correct, they started panicking. They swam round and round in circles till they were dizzy, and then they started going under. And we could see little paws sticking up out of the water and hear little shrieks for help. Fox turned back and went to their aid. He took one rabbit on his back, but then another clambered on, and then another, and they were rocking him from side to side. He shouted to them to get off. They'd drown him if they weren't careful. But they didn't heed him. They were far too busy panicking, thrashing about in the middle of the river. And suddenly, from the other bank, we saw a huge mass of debris bearing down on them. We shouted, but Fox couldn't hear us. The rabbits were making too much noise. I ordered some of the bigger animals to get back into the water. They were to save one rabbit each, while I took it on myself to save Fox. We had to move fast. The current was bringing the mass of logs and branches towards us ever more quickly. But finally, I reached Fox. He was exhausted. I tried to help him, but it was too late. The logs hit us. Everything went dark. I remember rushing water, and I remember choking, and then I remember nothing. We were watching from the riverbank. The logs took Badger and Fox downstream towards a waterfall. Oh, we could hear the water roaring over the fall, and we thought they were both goners, me hearties. But then the logs stopped moving. They got stuck right at the top of the fall, lodged on some stones. We raced down the side of the bank to see. There were the logs all right. But where were Fox and Badger? They were nowhere to be seen. Nowhere at all. We gave them up for lost. And then I thought I saw something. It was bobbing about in the water just beyond the logs. Then it went under. Then it came up again. Badger? It was Badger, mateys! Well, it was all hands to the rescue. Hare, Hedgehog, Weasel and me jumped in and started swimming towards him. When we got there, we found he was caught up in something, so we couldn't move him. So Hare held his head up out the water, while Weasel dived to see what kept pulling him under. It turned out he was caught in the weeds, mateys. Well, Weasel started chewing at the weeds, and I remember that.
Good old Weasel!
Yes, good old Weasel.
And then we pushes him to the bank and drags him out and lays him flat. But he isn't breathing. So I jumps on his chest and the water spouts out of his mouth like a great big fountain.
Yeah, I remember that too. Good old Weasel. We were ever so happy, mateys. Molly started crying. Yeah, ever so happy we were. Except the rabbits. They weren't happy, not happy at all. In fact, they were really miserable, because they knew they'd been the cause of all the trouble. Male Rabbit tried to get our sympathy by playing half-drowned, but Weasel just jumped on him like she jumped on Badger. That taught him. Then Kestrel went off in search of Fox, and we waited by the riverbank while Badger recovered from his shock. I remember, there was a lot of talk about what we'd do if Fox was lost.
It was as I had predicted.
Oh, dear.
I left the other creatures and flew off to do a little discreet hunting with my old friend Adder. I wanted to be ready for when I was called.
What were they going to call you? Alice?
And then, late in the evening, Kestrel returned. We could see at once that her news was not good. She told us that she had flown downriver, past the waterfall, and she had caught sight of Fox clinging to some driftwood. She had called to him, but he did not hear her. So she followed on as the driftwood took him further downriver towards a weir. Here she hoped that Fox would jump clear, using the stones as stepping stones. But he seemed to be asleep, unconscious perhaps. And he just lay there, hanging over the driftwood as it took him through the weir. After that, the river broadened and the current slowed. Kestrel followed as Fox was taken by the drifting debris down towards the town with its pleasure boats and steamers. If some human in a rowing boat should spot him, he was done for. But no one noticed the bedraggled creature lying on the drifting mass of rubbish, or if they did, they thought him dead. Afraid to attract attention to him, Kestrel kept her distance until Fox came to a bridge. He floated under it, and Kestrel flew to the other side to await his emergence. She watched as the drifting raft of twigs and branches came out from under the bridge. But Fox was not on it. Where was he? She flew under the bridge, but there was no sign of him there. She called and called, but there was no answer. He had simply disappeared. Finally, Kestrel returned to the group of farthing animals and told them her sad news. When she had finished, there was silence for a long time. Then, at last, Badger spoke.
Yeah, I know what Fox would want us to do now. He'd want us to go on with our journey. So that's exactly what we are going to do. Get in line, everybody. Toad, are you prepared to guide us as before? Course I am, matey. But what if Fox should come back and find us gone? Then he'll follow our scent and catch up.
So, we were all to play at Follow My Leader once again. Only this time Badger was to be leader. It was a foolhardy choice.
Come on
now.
Badger was tired from the accident at the river. He was old and he was slow, both in body and wit.
Yes, well, look who's talking.
Everyone was extremely low in spirits, the rabbits particularly. They kept on apologizing, and the more they did it, the more annoyed everyone became. And then Toady came to a sudden halt.
Oh, it was a horrible moment, mateys. It was as if my guiding star had gone out. So far I'd done all right, but I just didn't know which way to go next. I was confused. My head kept telling me to go straight ahead, but my instinct was pulling me to the left. Yes, it seemed that without Fox, everything had started to go wrong. Toad made a valiant effort and moved on. We all followed. Then he stopped again, and the word went back down the line. Halt! 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 People started to panic again. Not just the rabbits either. Everyone. Toad is lost, they said. First Fox, now Toad. It was too much. There was a total collapse of confidence, and I felt responsible for it. I had failed to save Fox, and now I was failing as leader. No one could have taken Fox's place, of course, and yet, who else would they have all followed? Well, I did my best. I reassured Toad, telling him that if he had made a mistake, no one would blame him. He had done very well so far, and I sent Kestrel on ahead to reconnoitre. It was during Kestrel's absence that one of the field mice announced a happy event, so we would have had to stop anyway. Owl took herself off. I think she was rather annoyed with me, actually. Well, all right, she was. And when she came back, she was only too glad to tell us what had gone wrong.
You're going round in a circle, heading back towards the river.
Oh, I couldn't help it, mateys. It was my homing instinct, you see. When I'd been captured and taken far away, my homing instinct had led me back to Farthing Wood. Now it was happening again. But what could I do about it?
I told him to use his memory. Just so long as Toad ignored his instinct and went only by what he saw and remembered along the way, he would be all right. Kestrel and I could fly ahead and report back on what we saw. From that, Toad would be able to choose our path. Together, we would succeed in reaching White Deer Park.
Fox is right. You are a wise old owl. I don't know where we would have ended up if it hadn't been for you.
Back in Farthing Wood, I expect.
Yes. Then Kestrel returned. She reported scrubland and birch trees the other way. And then I remembered. I began to feel better. I told Badger I was ready to move on. But where was everybody? Weasel and Adder had disappeared. Guess where mate is?
The field mouse had her babies. Oh, yummy!
Yes, this provided us with a problem. The mice went slowly as it was. With babies, it would be worse than ever. I kept wondering what Fox would do in the circumstances. The mice clearly wanted to leave the group and stay behind. I didn't like it. I remembered only too well what had happened to the newts. One thing was certain. Whatever conclusion I reached, it would be wrong. I was deep in discussion with Toad and Owl and Kestrel when Vole came marching up. It appeared that he and the other small rodents, the shrews and the field mice and so on, had taken a vote. Their decision was unanimous. They wanted to stay and make their home in the hedgerow where they were. There was a trickle of water in the ditch and plenty of cover, a good home for a ready-made family. The matter seemed to have been taken out of my hands. There was nothing I could do except to reluctantly agree. But my heart was heavy. I'd heard it all before. And if that wasn't enough, Moley, who had been trying to attract my attention for some time, told me that the adder was about to eat the babies.
The babies kept on crying, you see, and the mother was going crazy. Couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't anything. The other mothers were all up there giving her advice. Rabbit, old Mrs. Vole, Hare's wife and so on, but nothing did any good. Then Adder came up and she said, "I'll put them to sleep." Well, she fixed them with her eye. Then she started swaying from side to side. The rabbit fell into a trance. She kept repeating over and over in a sleepy sort of voice, "Don't panic, don't panic." The rodents were squeaking with fear. They were daft. They knew very well that a snake mesmerises its prey by picking it up. Well, Adder kept on saying, "You are going to sleep. You are going to sleep." And then suddenly, she fell asleep. She crashed to the floor and started snoring. Ha ha ha! She'd hypnotised herself.
Well, there we all were, tears in our eyes, saying goodbye to our old friends, the voles and mice and shrews. And there was Adder fast asleep. We tried and we tried, but no one could wake her.
And then they turned to me, and I sang to her.
Oh, no.
The beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Sounds of the rude world heard in the day. Low by the moonlight have all passed away. And the beautiful dreamer can wait on my song. List while I woo thee with soft melody. Gone all the cares of life's busy throng. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. And then, for anybody that's still listening, then we all went, leaving the field mice and the voles and the shrew behind.